If you pull up the financial statements for most of the Fortune 500 companies for the last quarter of 2025, you're going to see a number that technically shouldn't exist. We have just spent 18 months and billions of dollars implementing AI to make our workforce 30% faster. By every logic, our operating costs should have gone down, or at least our revenue per employee should have spiked. But for most companies, the operating expense line stayed flat, and in some cases, it actually went up. How is it possible to increase efficiency by 30% and save $0? Now, if you are a senior leader looking at your 2026 budget right now, you might be feeling a very specific type of frustration. You feel like your organization is spinning its wheels. There is more activity than ever. More code is being written, more content is being produced, and more analysis is being generated. But the organizational drag, which is the friction of actually getting a decision made, feels heavier than it did 2 years ago. Let me tell you that you aren't crazy. The math over here is broken. But it's not because the technology has failed. It's because of a fundamental economic law that most executive teams completely ignored during the implementation phase. Now, let's look at a micro example that we have all lived through in the last 6 months. Think about your inbox or your internal teams group. 2 years ago, if you asked your legal counsel or a marketing department for a complex draft, it took them 2 days. During those 2 days, you had silence. You could work. Now with Copilot tools, they can get you a draft in 20 minutes. That sounds like a victory for productivity, right? But here is the reality of that interaction. Because they reply you in 20 minutes, you feel the pressure to review it in 20 minutes. And because it is so easy for them to generate variations, they don't send you one draft, they send you 3. Here are the 3 options. Let me know what you think. Suddenly, a task that used to be 1 email and 2 days of quiet work has turned into a thread of 40 emails, instant feedback loops, and continuous partial attention spanning 4 hours. We didn't save time, we just increased the velocity of the noise. In my 13 years working on operating models and large-scale transformation, I've learned that there is a massive difference between speed and velocity. And this is high school physics really, but we often forget it in the boardroom. Speed is just distance over time. It's how fast you are moving. Velocity is speed, but with direction. Right now, corporate America has record-breaking speed, but our velocity is stalling. We have removed the friction of doing work, but we haven't solved the logic of why we are doing it. Now, the economic term for this is the Jevons Paradox. William Jevons was an economist in 1860, and he noticed coal. Steam engines were getting much more efficient, but they used less coal to do the same work. Now, the logic here says that coal consumption should drop, but in reality, coal consumption skyrocketed. Why is that? Because when a resource becomes cheap, human beings find new ways to consume it. When energy is cheap, we leave the lights on. When computing is cheap, we write sloppy code. And when work becomes cheap to produce, we just produce it. I want you to think of your company like a highway system around a major city. When traffic gets bad, the city adds 2 more lanes. And they say, this will solve the congestion. And to some extent, it does in short term, but it also creates an induced demand. Because the road is now wider and faster, more people decide to drive. And then within 12 months, the traffic is again moving at the exact same speed, which was slow, but now across 6 lanes instead of 4. This is exactly what happened to your workforce in 2025. We gave our team digital superhighways. We gave them tools to write code, generate reports, and analyze data instantly. We thought this would allow us to cut number of drivers, which is the headcount. Instead, we just induced more traffic. Marketing generates 50 variations of a campaign instead of 5. Developers push code updates daily instead of weekly. The highway is full. Now, let's look at the financial side of this. Imagine you run a restaurant. You find a way to lower the cost of grilling a steak by 50%. The cost-cutting mindset says, great, our food cost will drop by half. The Jevons Paradox reality will say, no, the customers will just eat twice as much steaks as they were doing before. If you're paying your employees a salary that is essentially a flat fees, it's an all-you-can-eat buffet model. If you make the work easier to consume, they will not go home at 2 p.m. They will simply consume more work to fill the time. They will spin the hamster wheel faster, not smarter. So if making people faster doesn't actually lower your cost, what does? Now, in a moment, I'm going to share 3 specific changes you need to make to your operating model to actually capture that value. But first, we have to look at the trap most leaders are falling into right now. So on the surface, the solution seems obvious. If the problem is induced demand, you just cap the demand. You cut the budget, you restrict the tools, you freeze the headcount, you say, we have the tech so we don't need the people. If this was just a math problem, the story would end here. You restrict the inputs and you save the margins. But that explanation is incomplete. In fact, if you just restrict the resources, you will destroy your company's ability to compete in 2026. The real risk is the devaluation of expertise. When doing becomes cheap, deciding becomes expensive. If you just fire the people who do the work, you lose the people to know how to judge the work. We are moving from an economy of creation to an economy of curation. And your operating model isn't built for curation. It's only built for creation. So what should a senior leader actually do differently? You don't need a hiring freeze. You need a frictional shift. Here are the 3 specific design principles for your 2026 operating model. The first strategy is to shift from supply side to demand side governance. Most people manage the supply, which is how many people do we have? You need to manage the demand. What are we allowing them to work on? Think of it like a nightclub bouncer. When the line moves faster, you just don't let everyone in. You control the room. You make the dress code stricter. You raise the cover charge. You raise the standard of entry. You need to audit your decisions correctly. Who is allowed to request a project? If the cost of production drops, the threshold for approval must rise. The second strategy is the automation friction tax. Now, this might sound counterintuitive. I want you to intentionally add friction back into the process. We have made it too easy to create work. You need to make it harder to request work. If someone wants a new report generated by AI, make them fill out a form justifying the business value. If someone wants to launch a new coding sprint, make them prove the revenue impact. By adding a small tax of effort to the request, you eliminate 40% of the tasks that are just nice to have. You actually clear the highway for the cars that actually matter and make it more meaningful. The third strategy is to monetize the output. Just don't tax the input. In your internal operating model, stop measuring number of hours worked. Start measuring the outcomes delivered. Now, this is the hardest shift. If you have a team of analysts that can do the core job in half the time, do not fill the other half with busy work, and definitely do not fire half of them. Because if you do that, you lose the institutional knowledge. Redeploy the capacity. Take that excess capacity from finance or whichever department and move it into, let's say, customer service. If your operating model is rigid and not flexible, and if you cannot move people across lines, the efficiency will just result in bloat within the site. The companies that win in 2026 won't be the ones with the fastest AI. Everyone has the fastest AI. That doesn't make you special anymore. The winners will be the ones who can filter the noise. They will be the ones who can control the flood of cheap tasks. They will channel that massive river of energy into the only 3 or 4 turbines that actually move the stock price. Now, the last part is the most leaders underestimate. If you're sitting in a steering committee this week, look at your project list. Is it shorter than last year or is it longer than last year? If it's longer, you aren't becoming more efficient. You are just building a wider highway for more traffic. I'm curious to know if you're seeing this digital inflation in your teams yet, or if you have found a specific way to cap it. Let me know in the comments. I'll be reading them.